If you're wondering why I'm here, the ancestor of Dave, it's because today we're painting a barbarian. Our very cool sponsor, Lazy Squire Games, has brought to us some miniatures that I got to play with.
Alright. Okay. That's it. It's me. I'm done LARPing. Did you enjoy the little LARP time? I did. Today we're just gonna dive in and have a full creative explore at making an awesome diorama using minis to really inspire your journey creating some just cool stuff. I had a plethora of minis to choose from, but this guy is the one that captured me and he's the one that I chose to work with. The first thing I needed to do was set about creating a bit of a painting plan. So I pulled out Jazz's whiteboard and I started to sketch up a really quick and rough idea of how I visualized this scene. And it became immediately evident that I needed a victim, an animal, if you will. Perhaps a deer running away from this hunter, or maybe he's a wise god of the forests. Sketching it out, I knew my framework, but I needed to find what would be the perfect victim. We have a new 3D printer, which meant that we would be able to print whatever I needed. The trouble was finding the perfect STL. And in my casual perusal of my mini factory, I came across this set of pigs by Cast and Play. Now these pigs are definitely joyously domestic farm pigs, but it didn't matter to me. One of them was lying down and that looked injured enough. I set about printing a 3D print of the pig on our new printer, trying to work out the settings for the first time. Thankfully, the print came out successfully, although it wasn't perfect. There's definitely some tweaking that needs to be made. For those who are 3D printer buffs, there's a lot of suction and pulling, creating very visible layer lines on this model. So, looking up the name for my protagonist or antagonist, depending on how you see it, I found he was called Faelheim, the Hinterlord. So I dived into it with that in mind. So to texture the rocks, I wanted to stipple them. And one of the things with this video is because it basically got to be a bit of a play for me, I got to use a whole bunch of things I haven't used before. I really got to grips with a bunch of the Vallejo range. I really like a lot of the way they work. I will say though, I found that it was difficult to find really dark tones. That was a bit of an interesting experience, having to mix black in with a lot of the colors I wanted to make this really gritty. Next up, I got to play with weathering pigments, or just pigments. I don't think they're necessarily called weathering pigments. This was amazing. I thoroughly recommend everyone get a set of pigments. It's so cool to work with. You just kind of use a stippling brush or a dry brush and you push around these dry powders and then you set them with airbrush thinner and it looks so cool. And when it dries as if it looks dry. It's amazing. I love it. I've never seen the ability to get like dry, powdery, dusty looking stuff when I've personally painted. Of course, I've seen it out there online, but I've never done it myself. And I knew as soon as I'd painted the base on this, I was going to go absolutely nuts with the base, the diorama that I was making, and use a lot of those weathering pigments. When painting this model, I painted it with a rather unusual approach, even for me. I painted it from the feet up, which isn't something I typically recommend. Usually I recommend painting models in the getting dressed method. Sometimes that can get a bit messy or a little bit difficult, and that's fine. You always have to adjust based on the model. But on this particular model, I wanted to sort of build the scene from the ground up and kind of make sure he tied in with those dark, earthy, dull colors of the base. He really felt at home in this drab, dreary winter setting. With this model, I chose to use a lot of really earthy and dull colors, staying away from the expensive dyes that would traditionally be seen in wealthy or upper class people in most fantasy settings. Colors like green, khaki, and brown are often quite naturally occurring and are easy to include and incorporate in a model, especially a hard-wearing, rugged one out in the hills. One thing I knew I wanted to play with was seeing if I could quickly establish a non-metallic metal technique. I identified all the areas of the model that were made of a metal, and I painted all of those elements together, quickly highlighting and shading to develop a high level of contrast. Now on Faelheim's back is the severed head of what actually looks to be like a sacred deer. It has a rune on its head. I wanted to paint the eyes really gross, so I just painted them flat white and then put a clotted blood effect in and around it. This thing's pretty gnarly, I have to admit, but I'm happy with how it turned out. Faelheim's beard was another element I wanted to keep quite muted. I almost glazed on a brown and then highlighted it up to a dirty blonde. I'm actually really happy with the beard. I think it captures the eye and draws it straight to the center of the model without being overpowering. The finishing touch to settle this barbarian into his environment was of course snow. I used Vallejo Snow technical effect and liberally dabbed on the snow, applying it primarily to the shoulders, the antlers, anywhere where there wasn't a huge amount of movement, but there was a lot of chance of snow to settle. I didn't put any snow around the hands or around the wrists or the weapon because these are areas that appear to be in motion and would be constantly in motion. It's unlikely a large amount of snow would settle on these areas, as even walking through a snowdrift, it's unlikely that snow would settle on these areas. In a particularly large snowdrift or a blizzard, of course, snow would catch on the fur of his cuffs and things like that, but I don't picture this being in the middle of that. I kind of picture a significant snowfall has happened, and he's now just got the remnants of the snow clinging to the outer layers of his clothes.
It's Divinus here again. I'm here to talk to you about the miniature quality of these here miniatures. This video was gracefully sponsored by Lazy Squire Games, and their mini for Storm Sunder is an example of the quality you can come to expect when you back the new Kickstarter for the rebirth of Wild Ascent. That's right, all the minis in Wild Ascent will be the same excellent quality as this here mini that my descendant David painted today.
That's right, my extremely disheveled ancestor. Lazy Squire Games are relaunching Wild Ascent in a new Kickstarter that includes a new expansion and upgrades to all the miniatures to their new printing quality that you've seen in their other game, Storm Sunder. This is an amazing opportunity to grab the original Wild Ascent game and all its expansions through their brand new relaunched Kickstarter. As someone who's played Wild Ascent recently, I am looking forward to the new expansion, which introduces a choose your own adventure style campaign into Wild Ascent, which is just awesome. Your choices will lead to diverging missions, and your campaign experience will be unique because of it. There are an absolutely massive range of cool models in Wild Ascent and its expansions, from the legendary hero characters, the Seekers, to the wild monsters that you hunt in your games of Wild Ascent. And that collection of miniatures is only getting better with their brand new model quality, as well as all the new ones being added in the Kickstarter and in the new expansion.
So what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description and back to Kickstarter today. Back like we did when we got off the long ships.
Yep. That makes sense.
It's Divinus back to tell you about the secret tools any hobbyist who wishes to make terrain or a diorama should be aware of. They had them in my time. We went to Bunnings and purchased North XPF insulation foam for our lodges and longhouses. And then we got the greatest tool, the knife. When applying the knife to insulation foam, you can create many wonderful things.
As my ancestor Divinus just said, XPF foam, pink board, blue foam, whatever it's called in your area, is a fantastic tool for hobby, especially the crafting of terrain and dioramas. It has a few properties that are different from foams like polystyrene. It doesn't pill and ball up like polystyrene does, which allows you to create these beautiful, smooth, carved stone walls and rock faces that look a lot like natural rock as it would chip, break, and wear in time. It was very easy for me to match the look I'd sketched for my diorama by rough cutting, breaking, and gluing together with hot glue the various pieces of XPF foam. I rapidly got the shape together. I used my knife to carve natural steps into the wilderness, but then I also carved out areas that would be flat, large stones or cairns even. The finishing touch would be some trees. Now I quickly pulled together armatures by using sculpture wire and then just drizzled hot glue over them, burning myself only once in the process. The lesson to be learned from this is that wire is a very good conductor of heat, and hot glue is very hot. So when you combine hot wire and hot glue, you get hot fingers. Hot fingers are prone to burning. Once the drizzled glue had dried, I was happy with the rough shape of the trees. Curling those pieces of wire around the foam, I was able to adhere it with more hot glue, which kept it in place long enough for me to go crazy with some sculptor mold and just slap in dirt texture and really bring together all the elements of this diorama base. Once that was dry, it was time to get down to painting. So I used a cracking medium and I painted that liberally across the surface of the trees. Leaving that all day to dry, I must admit I was a bit disappointed with the effect. The crackle medium had only crackled just a tiny amount. I had hoped for large rents in the bark that would look like the bark was dry and could be peeled off, but instead we have these sort of micro fissures across the surface that barely add any texture at all on a hobby scale. I look forward to researching ways to improve the effects of crackle mediums and find out a way if I can pull off this tree bark effect using them. I knew that all the stone areas would be painted with a method of stippling, similar to how I'd painted the rocks at the base of my barbarian. Stippling multiple different grays has an advantage in that it creates an incredibly natural look. It doesn't look so smooth and blended, but it has a scuffed natural look that works really well for certain surfaces, especially stone, which in nature rarely has smooth blends and transitions, and often is made up of multiple different colors all mixed together, sort of eclectically. With dry brushes to pull out the top areas and brighten them up, I was pretty happy with how this was coming along. It seems a bit bare bones and basic, but I knew I was about to go ham with Vallejo weathering pigments. Applying these pigments on such a large base was just a treat. The way they get pressed into all the areas and you can mix colors and use multiple different ones, it's just so much fun, and it really quickly builds up a natural and realistic feeling environment. I was blown away by how good this looked for how little time it took. There was a moment after applying all the pigments when I was ready to put on the airbrush thinner, and every time you drip it on, it oozes down and sets the powders, but it also looks very wet, and I was worried that that was the effect. I loved the dry tundra look that I'd gotten with the powders, and being unfamiliar with them, I was a little bit concerned it was going to end up looking like wet mud pie. Thankfully, after patience got the better of me and I waited a long time, they all dried up and the weathering pigments look just like they did when I laid them down, and I'm super happy with the result. So it was time to bring a bit of life to the model, throw on some flowers and some tufts from gamer's grass, and then dive into the finishing touches, which would be to adhere as much snow onto this as I possibly could. And there it is. This is a great example of how getting a really cool miniature and taking that and letting it inspire an entire creative process can be just such a satisfying journey. I really love how elements of this turned out. I love how the model fits so naturally in this icy landscape, and the storytelling, this pig that's running across in the trail of blood. It's just evocative, and it was fun, it was quick, and it was totally worth doing. This is going to look so good on the shelves at Tabletop Time. I really encourage you guys to dive out there and grab your own hobby tools, grab some of that foam that I believe my ancestor was talking about, and dive in, cut some foam up, build some terrain, have some fun.
Dave? 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 Dave?
Jeremy!
What? Wait, what?
Jeremy!
Dave? Dave?
Is that
you
crazy
okay?
Divinus guy
Dave.
gone? He left me here overnight.
What are you talking about? Are you
That
alright?
weird freak, he looks just like me.
What?
Look, help me out here.
yeah.
No, not that. I need you to tell everyone to like and subscribe and to thank the patrons for all their support. Because it's only through their support that we can make these videos, Jeremy.
It's true.
Thank you. And this is my natural habitat anyway.
Okay. Alright, well, see you then.
Alright, cheers. Thanks. See you on Monday.
See you then.
Cheers, buddy. Thank you.